So with that, good morning and hello, everybody. My name is Madeline Franklin. I am the federal liaison between the Western States Federal Agency Support Team, which we call WestFAST, and the Western States Water Council. And today I'm also joined by Michelle Bushman, who's the Deputy Director and General Counsel for the Western States Water Council. So jointly, Michelle and I are going to be hosts of today's panel discussion. We're going to be talking about stream restoration and water rights. And this actually marks the return of a webinar series that we've been holding on this topic. So if you've missed any of our previous events and want to check them out, our recordings are available on the WestFAST Western States Water Council website. And I'll throw a link to them in the chat in just a minute. So today we're going to hear more about stream restoration from a landowner's perspective. And I'm excited to have Becky Hatfield-Hyde with us, who's a rancher in the Klamath Basin, and Nadine Bailey, who is the Chief Operations Officer at Family Water Alliance. And then just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we turn it over to our panel discussion here. So we're recording this event. It will be available later. And then also just to support our interactions and not get too chaotic here today, I invite people to please keep themselves on mute and off camera until we get to any open discussion as we are able to get to it. We hope to be able to answer questions. If you think of something and like to put it in the chat before you forget, you're welcome to do that, and we'll try to get to those towards the end of the conversation. And we will invite people to unmute themselves if we are able to have time for that Q&A and open up the discussion to the larger group. So that's my little housekeeping item there. So with that, we're going to start off with some introductions. So I'm going to turn it to Becky and Nadine to please tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you're based, what you do for your livelihood and work.
Becky, me?
No,
okay.
You go first. You must go first.
Okay. So my name is Nadine Bailey. Currently, I serve as the COO for Family Water Alliance. We're a small nonprofit located in Colusa, California. We started about 35 years ago when farmers were faced with the threat of the listed coho salmon, and they didn't know what to do. So we started a fish screen program that kept fish out of irrigation water, and that's been very successful. We've partnered with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Bureau of Reclamation. They've been great partners, as has the state of California. So we're on 43. Myself, I got into this because of fisheries issues early on, and the listing of the northern spotted owl, trying to bring people together to solve problems and not litigate. So that's kind of been my life's work. But I do a lot of government affairs and worked for a state legislator for a while. So I've kind of been around forever, and I'm starting to feel that a little more each day. So that's who we are.
Okay. And I'll go and just say that I've had the pleasure of being around Nadine in meetings in Klamath, and she is just a incredibly warm person, I think, who believes in bringing people together and making people feel welcome. And I think at the end of the day, this whole webinar that we're going to have right now, which I'm not really sure how I ended up on, is really just about that, right? How do we bring people together and do good things on the land and take responsibility? So I was raised on my family ranch, which is out in the high desert east of Bend, Oregon. So if you know Bend, we are not Bend. We are east of Bend. And I wanted to just frame a little bit for you guys what that landscape in my mind is like: pronghorn and mule deer and bitterbrush and sage grouse and meadowlarks and bluebirds and Great Basin wild rye, just to give you a sense of that place. And our cattle, which are really important to me. My husband and I have 5 children. 4 of them are grown. And we are family ranchers, and that's the primary way that we make our living. When we married, I moved to his family ranch, which is in the Klamath River Basin, which you might have heard about in the news lately, as we have removed dams on the Klamath River. And just to put you in that place a little, I would, brings to mind like sandhill cranes and wokus and trout and ponderosa pines and Crater Lake. So I've worked on water issues in the Klamath Basin for about 25 years. We've had some big successes and some big failures. We've also done quite a bit of restoration on our family ranches, some for fishery, some for grouse. But yeah, that's who I am.
And
Well, thanks.
and
Oh, go ahead.
we met at the Coalition of the Willing. It's how we started our friendship, which is Family Water Alliance is still continuing the work that was begun by the Coalition of the Willing. So I'd be happy to send out a little blurb that I just wrote about that if anybody's interested.
Please do. So for those who haven't been on this webinar before, and Becky and Nadine, I think that includes you,
Yes.
a little bit of context. Our webinar series has been focused on stream restoration. The government, in their infinite wisdom, dumped a ton of money into infrastructure and all kinds of other things. And among those beneficial uses of funds was stream restoration. And because WestFAST and Western States Water Council have worked together in a collaborative way over the past many years, we thought we should get together as states and federal agencies to talk about, before federal agencies jump in and use this money to do stream restoration work, what kinds of things do they need to be aware of from a state federal perspective. So we're focused primarily on what are state laws that federal agencies need to be aware of as they're going forward with this work and this amazing funding that has come out. But as we went through that process, we thought, who the people we really need to reach out to are the farmers and ranchers and water rights owners themselves, and see what this is like from their perspective, and can we learn some lessons from what they've experienced. And so we appreciate you joining us, and are looking forward to the panel discussion today. And I wanted to get started with maybe some positive experiences, because I think there's a lot of negativity that we could probably bring out, but there are lessons learned from that negativity. So we want to go down that road a bit. But we wanted to start with, what does it look like when federal agencies, when state agencies, when farmers and ranchers from maybe environmentalist groups are all working together in a collaborative way to successfully accomplish good things around stream restoration and protecting water rights. And I know we've already had these conversations separately, but wanted to bring some of that information out so that the group could benefit from some of those examples. So Nadine, we'll go ahead and start with you again, and then we'll turn to Becky.
So let's go back 35 years to when the salmon were listed on the Sacramento River, and people said, well, there's nothing you can do. You can't screen in the Sacramento River Basin because the water's got too much materials, the turbidity's too high. You'll never do it. You can't do anything. You just need to fight the listing. So a couple of women and a few gentlemen got together and started Family Water Alliance, and Sue Sutton and Marion Mathis had a vision for protecting fish. And you can go on our website, and there's a video about Marion Mathis on our website. And Marion talks about how people told her, you are going to kill the farming industry in the Sacramento Valley if you collaborate and you do anything with anybody. So right now we look at we're on our 45th screen, and people come to us and say, we've got a project, here's money, go do it. That's not what happened. They had to fight hard just to convince the ranchers and farmers to even participate. There's also a video of the first screen participant, and I think they built 3 and had to pull them all out and start over again. And that's just a good look at how it happens when you start in these projects. I think the number one thing that made it was you had farmers running the program. You had people that were on the ground and were respected, and they knew that things don't always work out right away, and you have to go back to the drawing board, and you make your team. And Family Water Alliance put together a team with intake screens that's still working today. And so it takes those types of relationships. They say in real estate it's location, location, location. In stream restoration, it's relationship, relationship, relationship. And I got to give a shout out to the guy from NOAA and the guy from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because Bob Thomas, and it's bad to get old. Anyway, I'll think of him in a minute. But they were cheerleaders, and they brought everybody together and said, okay, you want to restore this? Then if you've got concerns, you bring them to this table. And they met quarterly, and if you had concerns, you got them on the table then, and then you moved on. And that's why it was a success. We had a great team, and most of them were still Dan Meyer from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So people really stepped out of their comfort zones and worked hard.
I love that. I think I will just echo what Nadine is saying there. My experience, especially around work that I've been involved with in the Klamath, it has been so important to bring together, like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, Intermountain West Joint Venture, NRCS, tribes in our basin. There's 4 federally recognized tribes and other tribes, but I would say that anything good that we have done, and NGOs too, like Sustainable Northwest was very, very helpful initially in some of the stream work we did on our ranch that we bought on the Sycan, which was extremely degraded condition. And I would say that sometimes what we forget is that if we do something well that is small with partners in a place, like on one ranch, but we begin to bring things together, that especially in places where there's been great conflict, it's amazing how that little thing can become a catalyst for things that grow and grow and grow. And so I know that there's a lot of stream professionals and professionals on this call, and just, I guess what I want to say is that you absolutely can make a difference in helping create these relationships. And depending on where you are, we know it's not easy, but you're not just, this isn't about fixing streams. This is about building resilient communities for all of our future. And so I'll stop there, because I want to get to the failure stuff, because it's so much easier to talk about.
Well, and so that leads us right in, right? So please do, tell us about some of those projects and experiences that didn't go so well, and really what could have been done differently there.
You want me to go? So
please.
So we were brought in later, but there's a project in Siskiyou County that has gotten, I think they're on their 3rd grant now, and they haven't produced a project because everybody's fighting and everybody has an idea of what their vision is. and nobody brought everybody together and said, okay, well, we fund this grant. That doesn't make everyone's vision come together. You have to have the leadership to do that. You have to have those hard conversations early on, and they didn't do that. And how bad is it? I said about 6 months ago, I said, maybe I'll just go work in the Middle East because I think that would be easier. Some of these fights in these different watersheds are so toxic. I hate to use that word because we're using that about the Klamath a lot, but they are toxic. And so you have to look at how you build those relationships and get those people to sit down and talk about what is that shared vision. And maybe it's not the same, but that's usually what happens. And I see the failures. And you know, the other thing that I think is a failure is when we spend 20 times more money than we have to on one project because everybody wants to overbuild it. And that's a failure too, because those are projects that aren't going to get done somewhere else, and things aren't going to get fixed. So we need to start looking at what is realistic as well. So I think there's a failure to address how much restoration work has to be done and what it's going to cost. And we can't all have Cadillacs. I was joking with a friend of mine yesterday. We're going to write a cookbook on how to be poor because that's how we were raised. And so we know how to be poor, and we got to start learning how to do that in the watersheds and get things fixed.
Okay, good. So I'll start this is my favorite part of of this webinar, how everything goes bad. But I will start that by saying I am a depressed optimist. It took me a long time to come to that term, but it's the truth. And I was just thinking, since I'm in the Klamath River Basin, which has had this most amazing dam removal in the world, just days ago, we had a companion agreement in the Klamath Basin to that agreement that dealt with a lot of issues, restoration of important tributaries for salmon return, more certainty for water for farmers in the Klamath Reclamation Project, restoration for fisheries in Klamath Lake, flows to refuges, where I think if not everybody follows the news, but we have, you know, I don't know what it is at 90,000 birds dying on the Klamath refuges as we speak of botulism, which is because when those agreements were signed 7 years ago, unfortunately, because of the dysfunctional state of our United States Congress and the fact that we were doing an Indian water rights settlement, meant that in DC they couldn't get their act together. So vast partnership across many tribes, ag community, and conservationists just kind of basically got thrown in the garbage. Probably 20 years of people power work thrown away. And I will say, I'm at this private lands conference right now, which is why I'm in a nice motel room instead of my, as we were talking earlier, mousy office. One of the Fish and Wildlife people from a adjoining region was sharing all their successes yesterday, and they said, well, we are doing all this good collaborative work because we don't want to be like Klamath. And then afterwards I was like, okay, vent to a couple of like friendly faces and then have a very nice conversation with this person from U.S. Fish and Wildlife that says, whoa, no community in this country wants to be in a place where their tribal people, their family farms and ranches, their community, their waterways are not going in a healthy way. And so just how we talk about these basins and communities matters. So what I will say right now is that in Klamath, after those agreements failed, and I think this relates directly to stream restoration and practitioners that are trying to get good stream restoration on the ground, you really have to be savvy about the issues that are going on in the place you're in. Now in Klamath, we're really in the soup, maybe more so than a lot of places in the West. And I think I feel like sometimes in the last 5 years, I've felt like we're literally living in the Old Testament. I'm like, okay, we had the driest time in 1,200 years. We're facing drought, fire, grasshoppers, plague because of the COVID epidemic, unstable markets with hay and cattle, and wolves to top it off. So if you are a pleasant, inspired, excited stream restoration professional, and you come into our community, that's hard. And it takes special people to be able to do that. And the most special people, I think, recognize the breadth of what they're entering when they come into that community. So after this great collapse that we've had, we are rebuilding. I'm part of a group called the Upper Klamath Basin Ag Collaborative, where we're trying to restore streams above Klamath Lake, working with private landowners, working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with National Marine Fisheries, with Klamath tribes, with U.S. Fish, both partners and the other side. And I will say that especially one character in U.S. Fish and Wildlife, showed up at our ranch about 3 years ago in Beatty, and we were meeting in our hay shed, and it was hot, and it was in the middle of the drought, and we've really been gutted out as agriculture, full water calls with drought on top, with all of that. And I talked to this individual a couple of days ago, and I said, I feel like I was that person that was so believed in all of this stream restoration, all the good things we can do, but I was the person who had just like slid down the wall and was now laying in the dirt. And that this individual from U.S. Fish and Wildlife sort of like picked me up by the by the scruff and like shook me out a little and said, I think we can do some good things here. Let's try again. That's the spirit that you have, is to try again. And we are trying again. And we're trying to put things back together, but we're doing it slowly again through relationships, trying to be very, very in tune to where the landowner community is around us, the pain that's happening within places like the Klamath tribes, the bigger picture too of all the issues facing the basin. So I know this is an extreme example because it's Klamath, but I think it probably has some merit in other places, I hope. So thank you for that. Letting me say it, therapy session.
Following up on that, I think one thing that came out of our discussions with both of you is that landowners really do care about stream restoration. They're not opposed to taking care of the land itself. It's the way that it is accomplished that sometimes creates the friction. So I wanted to kind of bring out what benefits from a farmer, landowner, rancher perspective, what kind of benefits are they looking for when it comes to stream restoration? And that obviously may vary from place to place, but just overall, What kind of benefits are they looking for? And what kinds of things are they most concerned about when other people are coming to that table with their own ideas, and pushing on the farmers and ranchers, the landowners, to accomplish certain things related to stream restoration. Sorry.
So Becky wasn't supposed to make me cry. Thanks, Becky. And that's why I totally know why people gravitate towards her, because she speaks truth in so many ways. But Becky highlighted a couple of the things that are a big frustration right now. And if you are trying to make a living farming, I was down at a farm to fork dinner in Chico on Sunday night, and I just happened to stumble across these two women that have a chestnut farm. And so I got out my little handy dandy video camera and I said, hey, what about this? And so here's this lady in kind of her tie-dyed shirt, and she's like, well, family farms are the economic driver for these rural communities. They pump money in, and we're just burdened. And she's probably late 50s, and she said we're aging rapidly and no one's taking our place. We have hundreds of more regulations that we have to figure out as an individual family farm, and the prices and the costs of doing business right now are overwhelming. So you've got all of these things, and then you have somebody drive up in a brand new car in their starched little outfit, and they get out and they say, well, we're here to help you. And you think, do you have wolves in the back of your truck? That's a new thing. And I said, if some of the people that are out trying to help had their savings account sitting in their middle of their yard where I just realized my battery's getting low, where the neighbor's dog could come eat it, those are real problems here. And so you have to understand that people are our industry is on the edge. Like if you look at where our office is in the Sacramento Valley, I'd say that 50% of the land is for sale right now. It's going to get sold because the people there can't make money farming at it anymore. And if you think you have restoration problems now, try doing that with subdivisions. So we're at a tipping point, and I think that's the biggest problem with restoration. People want to do it, but they don't know if they're going to survive the next irrigation season. I mean, that's the problem. And the relationships with the tribes is another. We still don't understand each other. So I'm going to plug in. Becky, you take over.
Okay, I'll take over. I think what I don't want to do is, like, I am, now that I've been dusted off a little, and remember, we all have to take responsibility now for what's going on and not be victims. We've got to take responsibility, but I think Nadine is spot on. And it's one of the things that we're really working on in our outreach with the Ag Collaborative. And some of this, this is social science. And we forget that social science has a huge place in these communities, because restoration professionals are trying to do the right thing. But when they don't look at the full picture, when they come in the door, then they have no idea. They don't know, okay, will my stream restoration, this was an issue that you mentioned too, will it affect water rights? Will it affect my water rights? How you do your stream restoration? That's a huge issue for people and scary for people, because there's value to their water right because they paid for their land with water rights on it, which affects the value of their land and how much they've had to be in debt over a long period of time sometimes to even begin to pay off their land. So I think people walk into this just very naive sometimes about those issues. I also think there's a very, very deeper thing with outreach, and what we're trying to do at the Ag Collaborative right now is, and this is scary because we all know this, we have unprecedented federal dollars, which we need. We need them in the climate, but we also have to go slow with people. And when we go to the neighbors, the first question is not, did you know that anadromous fish are returning to the Upper Klamath for the first time in 100 years? And you are in critical territory for them to do well. Plus, the sediment is full of phosphorus on your ranch and it's killing suckers in Klamath Lake. We don't approach that way. We say, how are you doing? What's going on here? And when you do that and you sit at the table with people, then they'll cry. And they're not just interested in their family's farm or ranch surviving what's going on. They're interested in their community as a whole surviving. And as a matter of fact, that community as a whole is another place where we should start investing in these rural places to show that this isn't just some quick and dirty restoration operation going on, because we can dump money. And the other thing that I will say that is really critical that I keep pushing very hard on is we have gone through kind of restoration phases. First, it was the Roskin approach. Then it was the passive approach. Now we're doing process-based. Now we're doing, and you think about the restoration professionals are not all on the same page. The National Marine Fisheries Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the tribes are not all on the same page in terms of what we need to do to fix some of these systems. And some of these systems, like the Sprague, for example, were diked and drained in the 1950s by the federal government. And the amount of restoration that needs to be done is at an incredible scale. And so we have to stop looking at landowners that are living in these systems that we all created. I mean, I can take the blame, even though I wasn't born 70 years ago when the Corps of Engineers diked the Sprague. I'm living with that. My neighbors are living with that. They're living with the consequences of that. And they're looking at a system that has looked the way it looks now for their entire lifetime. So understanding and getting a vision in everyone's head about what a thriving farming, ranching, healthy fishery, healthy tribal communities looks like is something we have to create, right? And be humble. Like, don't just be like, well, I know what we're doing here. Well, no, we don't. None of us do. Well, I mean, let's assume we're also wrong as we approach. Anyway, I'll stop. Cut me off. This is what Nadine and I talked about, was like, let's pretend like this is like a presidential debate with the mics not muted, and then it should be like, I'm cutting in on you now.
So
No.
Becky brought up something that I think everybody needs to remember, and that's the social science and the politics. And I'll give you a perfect example. The failure of that huge settlement or group that came together was political. And you've got people out there now that are so polarized on either side that it is, if you're in the middle, you are getting arrows shot into you. Maybe I should use a better analogy, but it's bad. And this morning I'm typing a note to one of my fisheries biologist friend who I trust about the salmon on the Klamath because he's always been honest with me. And I said, I'm so sorry that people are saying horrible things to you. Don't give up. You know, don't give up. We have to, there are those of us out there that are tied to the community, to the river, to the farms, and those stakeholders have to be empowered. But I'll give you a perfect example. If it wasn't for a group of really far-thinking Calusa board members and Sac Valley board members, I wouldn't be here. We went $90,000 in the hole last year because of our work on the Klamath, because none of our grants came through. And they were delayed, and I'm telling the board, and they just said, you know, this work is important, but how many nonprofit boards would allow their executive to do what I did last year, go 90,000 in the hole? So the political and the social are very important. And I really want to recognize those farmers like Becky that are going into the middle of the fray, in that middle ground, because it is not fun to be in, especially right now. It's easier to be right or left, but the middle is a tough business. So don't forget us.
And so I think you both have woven some of my next question into some of your remarks already, but you know, if you could offer some very specific or more tangible suggestions for what state and federal agencies can do to ensure success when they're either funding or otherwise leading stream restoration efforts. If there's anything that that you can offer that would be maybe more successful.
Get your agencies together. I don't care if it's in a room where you lock each other up for 3 days, but don't come to us and say, we're going to do this, and then have your sister agency go, well, did you know you're not protecting the frosted mugwump if you do that? And we're going to start taking procedures against you. I feel like the kid whose parents are getting a divorce all the time, and it's tough. We need the agencies to be on the same page and say, you know, we're going to do something good here. We're not going for perfect. We're going to do something good. And there might be some mistakes. Give us some grace, and we can do great things. And we are doing great things. But we've got to have you in our corner fighting for us. We can't be fighting with your sister agencies at the same time we're trying to accomplish things. So.
Yes, she is spot on. So we've been talking a lot about federal agencies, but we need to include state agencies absolutely in this as well. So if you have a region like in ours, in order to really do something well, we need the federal family very much on the same page. We need the National Marine Fisheries Service working hand in hand with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, working hand in hand with the tribal community in the region, working hand in hand with the state agencies that are dealing with water rights, and everybody, you know, needs to kind of be very aware that working out those issues within state and federal entities first before you knock on any doors is really important. And I can't even tell you how important that is. I actually did this with a lovely person from National Marine Fisheries Service about 2 months ago, where they were like worried about some of the things that were being created and blah, blah, blah. And I said, here's what I want to say to you. I am a rancher. I make a living moving cows around, right? I cannot be the moderator between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and you guys getting on the same page with what the tribes want as far as traditional ecological knowledge being brought into the process right now. I'm going to do my part and be responsible. Take responsibility. I'm going to take responsibility from where I sit to try to make things better here for this community and not be a victim. You all need to take absolute responsibility where you sit and make sure that you are in line. Because then it's too easy, right? It's really easy to be like, oh, those damn landowners in the Sprague, they'll never do what they need to be doing, right? Oh, woe is me. Well, what are you doing, right? What's your piece in this? Get after it, as my 24-year-old son said when he was teaching math to a bunch of 7th graders. You all get after it. Okay. Does that make sense, you guys? I mean, you should weigh in, like, if we're not making sense.
No, you absolutely are. And actually, we got a great question in the chat that I think is relevant to bring up right now, which Anna Smith asked, getting agencies on the same page makes sense. Would it feel exclusionary? Would that cause any, I guess, misunderstandings about conversations happening without others in the room?
So when they did the Sacramento Valley Fish Screen effort, they met quarterly. Dan Meyer gathered all the agencies up. You showed up in person at a meeting, and if you had a problem, it came to that meeting. And they did that for 20 years, those quarterly meetings. And somebody's got to show some leadership where these are the projects that are coming forward. If you've got a problem with them, this is it. And then they would say inside the agencies, and the NGOs were there. There were not a lot of the ranchers, but the Family Water Alliance was there, and all the other contractors would say, yeah, that'll work. No, that won't work. That'll help. That's not helpful. So having those pre-meetings, they don't have to be exclusionary, but they do have to have a goal. This is our goal. We are getting this project done. Get on the bus. This is where, if you want to complain about this, this is where it happens. That's what we're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah,
and if there's conflict, I mean, that's the business we're in, right? Is how do we work through if that created some sort of misunderstanding? But really, if you are going to, like, it's not really fair because Nadine and I have been working on these issues for decades. So we kind of have gotten to the point where we're like, oh, I kind of understand the difference between somebody from the Klamath Watershed Partnership knocked on my door, somebody from Trout Unlimited knocked on my door, someone from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program knocked on my door, someone from, somewhere else knocked on my door. Like this is the NRCS, not the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, not the National Marine Fisheries Service, right? But your typical landowner on the ground has not spent all their time trying to figure out who everyone is and what they're doing and why they're there in the first place, right? Like, it's irresponsible to not bring yourself together. And what you'll find then is you'll be like, damn, we don't always agree on what needs to happen here. And then we throw a tribe in there and they say, wait a minute, right? Yeah. Wait a minute, you didn't think of us. So I think we do have a lot of pressure focused on the landowner, especially in the places like, I have a beautiful example of this. In the Sprague, when we straighten the Sprague, there is a landowner in the Sprague River Valley that was there, who's like 90 years old, who was there when they straightened the Sprague River. And he says to this day, he goes, well, they told me I need to rip my willows out. We need to straighten the Sprague. This is what we're doing now. This is what you're supposed to do. Now that landowner has absolutely the worst hotspot for water quality in the Sprague River, right? And their river's fenced, right? So, geez, that should help with livestock in the river. It can't. It's a mess. It's diked. It's channelized. It's a huge project to fix. This particular landowner, when we did visits with them, can't even afford to keep their plumbing straight in their bathroom right now. And they have the worst water quality in the Sprague. And so everybody will be like, oh, look at that horrid landowner and what they've done to the Sprague. Well, come on, people. Let's wake up together here. Let's get our act together so that when we approach a landowner, we're being really comprehensive in knowing what we're trying to do. I mean, let's get after it. And we can. Don't be discouraged. None of us are victims. We're all taking responsibility. We all are. And it's hard. Yes, maybe we are, maybe we take some pretty hard hits for taking responsibility. But that is what we need to do today.
And Becky, I think you talked previously about scale. Like sometimes we are looking at these projects as very narrow in scope, and in part that's because we get funding that comes through in small increments, and so we're looking at the smaller picture of what can we do in this particular stream or river. But that sometimes we need to take a step back and look at what's happening in the entire watershed. And can we coordinate these projects so that instead of just doing one that then gets at cross purposes maybe with another project that's not very far away, how do we coordinate these projects? And in addition to that, what you were just talking about was not just a physical scale, but also a historical scale, taking a step back and looking at the history of that area and what is it that we're trying to undo, and where does that responsibility lie? So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, I love that. And what I would say is, you know, where did this all start? It started with colonization when my people were like, hello, get on a boat and try to find another place on the planet to live because it's not working out so well in your home country. And then we colonized this country in a way that was devastating for Native people. And then in these stream systems, what we know we did was we did massive trapping out of beavers. And beavers are really popular right now, and I love beavers, but there are people right now that go, okay, all we have to do is, you know, do like they did in the 40s and parachute beavers in all over the West, and then we'll stop climate change and everything will be okay. You know, and we can sell it by putting a very cute video of a beaver up, which works, right? You're like, God, I love them. They're so cute. The point is, we have to, we have to look at these watersheds at their scale of what's going on, how we manage the forests, how we diked them, when were the beavers removed, how did our livestock grazing further degrade that? Like and I think we need to step away from like this person, that man in the Sprague, who's grouchy, right? But why wouldn't he be, right? He's going broke. He's grouchy as hell. And we say, well, look at that grouchy as hell person who lives in the worst water quality. No, we have to fix the forest. We have to fix the watershed at scale. We have to stop doing random acts of restoration, which have been done in the Sprague all over the place. But for some reason, it hasn't made a hill of beans difference to suckers in Klamath Lake, right? So we need to step it up in that way. I hope that answers that.
Well, at a time when we're saying step it up, I agree we need to take a step back, because that's my background is forestry. And when I started, I was a participant in President Clinton's Forest Summit in Portland because my daughter was on a program with him. and she showed him the yearbook of all the kids whose parents would lose their job. And he said, well, I'm going to have this summit. And she said, you know, we have lightning fires. And if we don't have forest management, then the forest will burn. So she was 10 years old and she could see that. But yet these devastating fires, we predicted them 30 years ago. And there's a great presentation by somebody, and I'm not sure, where's the bull trout habitat? Is that you? Are you bull trout, Becky, or is that farther up?
Yeah.
There was a fire that was in 2 arms of bull trout habitat, and that bull trout is very endangered. And so on one side, the fire came hot through the whole watershed. On one side of the watershed was federal land. On the other side was private. The biologist, the bull trout biologist, went out, worked with a private timber company after the fire. They took trees, cut them off, jackstrawed them. And so when a really bad rain event came through, where they had taken this invasive action, they had no sediment in the stream, very little. The other side, he's got pictures, blew out. It killed every bull trout that they had. So here's an example of that flexibility, listening to each other, trying to look at the whole watershed. We're trying to save fish, but the number one threat to fisheries right now is the high intensity fires that are burning on federal lands. If we get an El Nino year this year, you're going to see tons of sediment go into the Klamath system. And we can't even get, finally NRCS is starting to release their intensity. They're mapping the intensity of the fire, because the Forest Service doesn't want to do that, because then they get in trouble because they let things get too hot. Everybody wants fire, but nobody understands. A lot of people don't understand there's good fire and there's bad fire. And a lot of what we're having now is high intensity fire. One of the park fire that burnt was the fastest growing fire in the history of California. We are hiking down in to look at some of the restoration. They spent millions of restoration in there for fisheries restoration, and it's all gone, melted into the dirt. It is gone. And what didn't they do? They didn't thin, because nobody wanted to do invasive thinning in there because they might disturb something. And now it's gone. It looks like a bomb went off. So at some point we have to bring people together with some common sense and understand that these are Mediterranean forests. They were not a sea of constant old growth. They looked much different than the perception that people have of our forests now. So sorry, got on my soapbox.
I'm noticing that Dan has that question in the chat. Dan Keppen.
Oh
Yeah.
And, Dan Keppen got us into this.
yes.
Right. So blame him for getting these mouthy women up here.
Well, let's read the question for those who can't see it.
Yeah. Okay.
It says, Dan, do you want to ask your question?
Ask it, Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi. Hey, great job. This has been awesome. You guys have done an awesome job. So my question is, obviously all of our organizations that we work for, Nadine happens to be on my board of directors at Family Farm Alliance, not to be confused with Family Water Alliance, which is her organization. But, a lot of us were very involved in trying to secure these monies in the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed several years ago. My question is, there's more money out there. It's a level of generation, right? A once in a generation level of funding. I am hearing concerns from other parts of the West about the agency's ability to get these dollars on the ground into projects. And a lot of it has to do with process and perhaps capacity issues at the agencies. Just curious to see what your experience for both of you have been, because you've been involved with, trying to get some of these dollars and putting them to use on the ground for good projects.
So I'll go first. I was sitting with the fisheries biologist from the UROC on the because we took a tour to see the dam removal. And I said, you know, all that money that was promised that was going to hit the ground, and we were going to be making sure that farmers that had endangered fish going up their irrigation, their irrigation canals, that they were taken care of. I said, nobody's doing that. I said, we're the only ones out there saying, hey, you promised this. And he said, well, put together something and we'll go fight for it. So that's what we're doing, but we're 2 years behind the curve. There are going to be fish in those irrigation channels before we get anything built. And that's wrong. I mean, because these people were promised that they would be safe, and they're not. So it's very slow. We got a grant a year and a half ago, and it just funded last month. And it's a partnership with, you won't see our name on it, it's a partnership with Trout Unlimited. But it just funded last month. That's how far behind we are.
So I feel like, Dan, in our area, that because we're doing that, the big swing and kind of pulling things together, I feel hopeful about the funding. But I would actually like to hear your thought on this.
Well, it's a big issue. It's a big concern. And for the last 2 years, it's been one of the top priorities of our organization is, making sure that this once in a generation level of funding actually gets out on the ground. And so, and across the board, there's been complaints about capacity issues with, NRCS, Forest Service, for example. But we work closely with the Bureau of Reclamation, and we're starting to see some of those dollars come out. There's $8.3 billion for the Bureau to do Western water infrastructure fixes, but still, I can't point to too many examples where shovels in the ground here 3 years after the bipartisan infrastructure law was signed. So it is a concern, Becky, and it's a concern to us because a bunch of us spent a lot of political capital, getting that stuff into the bipartisan infrastructure law back in 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you for bringing that question up and bring those points up, Dan. So I do want to be mindful of the time, actually, because we're already a minute up to the hour. So what I would love to do, if we could, is just close with Nadine and Becky. If you had just 1 or 2 takeaways that you'd like people to have with them when they leave this webinar, what would you like people to take away?
Don't give up. These communities are too important. Rural communities give us so much more value than what people understand. So please don't give up on us. Make sure that Becky gets what she needs because she's out there on the front lines. I mean, really, we're working hard. Don't give up.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I would say I have so many good friends in state and federal agencies that are part of what have, I mean, I don't know how to say it in a good way, but it's like we need you. We need each other. We need you more than ever.
Yeah.
And we need you to, when you show up, we need you to be aware of all the things that are going on. I know that's a tall ask, but really be mindful. It's not just about putting in a fish screen or reconnecting a spring to the river or planting willows or whatever. All those things are lovely. Reconnecting floodplains like we did on our ranch in Beatty. Those are really good things. But let's see each other. Let's be in community with each other because we need each other because we are all taking care of this, right? We all are.
Wonderful. Well, hey, thank you both so much for taking the time to be here. We so appreciate it. I know you're in different parts of the state and at conferences and things like that. So it's a busy time. So thank you. We appreciate it, and thank you all for joining us on the line too. We will be continuing this series over the next few months, so we hope you join us for our next webinar event.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye.